She stands on the prow of a longship, her hair braided, a shield on her arm, and an axe in her hand, every bit as fierce as the bearded men beside her. This is the Shieldmaiden, an icon of female strength who has stormed the shores of our modern pop culture. But for over a century, if you asked a historian if these warrior women were real, the answer was a firm no. They were dismissed as myths, literary fantasies created hundreds of years after the Viking Age had ended. Welcome to 10-Minute History. I'm your host, Jake Sullivan, and today we're diving deep into one of the most fiercely debated questions of the Viking Age: were the Shieldmaidens real? The answer, as we're about to discover, is far more complex and thrilling than a simple yes or no, and it has been completely rewritten by a single discovery that acted as a historical bombshell. To understand the possibility of the Shieldmaiden, we first have to understand her world. At first glance, Viking Age Scandinavia seems deeply patriarchal, a world where men dominated politics, law, and war. But to see Viking women as purely domestic and subjugated is to miss a crucial part of the picture. When a Viking man went raiding or trading, he didn't leave behind a powerless wife. He left a Husfreyja, the mistress of the household. This wasn't just a title. She was the commander of the entire farmstead, its economy, and all the people within it. Her symbol of authority was a set of keys worn at her waist, a public declaration that she was the manager of the family's wealth and well-being. She was the CEO and chief operating officer of a self-sufficient economic unit. Viking women also had remarkable legal rights for the era. They could inherit property, and they had the right to initiate a divorce for reasons ranging from abuse to simple dissatisfaction. Upon divorce, a woman was entitled to her dowry and a share of the marital property. This framework of female authority and legal agency is critical. It means we're not starting from a baseline of complete female subjugation. The Viking woman was a respected and powerful figure, a commander in her own right. The question is whether that command could ever extend to the battlefield. If the social structure left the door open for powerful women, Norse mythology kicked that door down. The Viking cosmos was teeming with formidable female figures who were anything but passive. Chief among them were the Valkyries. Their name literally means choosers of the slain. These were supernatural servants of the god Odin, who flew over battlefields to decide who would live and who would die, escorting the spirits of chosen warriors to Valhalla. Their very names mean things like war, battle, and spear. The poems describe them riding through the air in helmets, their armor covered in blood, with beams of light shining from their spears. They are the ultimate divine sanctioning of the woman at arms. But Odin didn't have a monopoly on fallen warriors. The goddess Freyja, the foremost female deity, was a goddess of love, beauty, magic, and, crucially, war. Ancient poems state that Freyja had a deal with Odin. She received half of all warriors slain in battle in her own hall, folkvanger, or army field. This is a staggering detail. The principal goddess of the Norse pantheon was a war deity on par with Odin himself. This embeds the concept of female martial authority at the highest level of the Viking cosmos. With this cultural and mythological backdrop, the idea of a mortal woman emulating these powerful figures becomes far less of a conceptual leap. But even with divine inspiration, any woman who took up arms faced the same grim reality as the men. Viking warfare was a world of close quarters, muscle-powered killing. The most common weapons were the spear and the axe. The most prestigious was the sword, a costly, high-status item. But the most important piece of equipment was the shield, the source of the name Shieldmaiden. It was heavy, required considerable arm and shoulder strength to hold in combat, and was the core of the main Viking tactic, the shield wall. This is the greatest challenge to the idea of the Shieldmaiden. On average, females have less upper body strength than males, a significant disadvantage in a battle decided by the power to hold a shield or swing an axe. But this doesn't rule it out entirely. A sharp weapon is a great equalizer. Skill and speed could compensate for a lack of raw strength. We know teenage boys fought in these armies, and a strong 16-year-old girl could be physically comparable to a 15-year-old boy. And, of course, there are always exceptional individuals. The literary world of the Vikings is where these exceptional individuals come to life. Our most vivid portraits of Shieldmaidens come from the Sagas, written in Iceland in the 13th and 14th centuries, 200 to 400 years after the events they describe. They aren't literal history, but a blend of historical memory and literary fiction. And the most complete portrait of a Shieldmaiden is the saga of a woman named Hervor. From birth, Hervor was different. The saga says she was as strong as a boy and had no interest in weaving or embroidery. Instead, she learned to handle a shield, a sword, and a bow. As a young woman, she ran away from home, dressed as a man, took the name Hervarder, and became a Viking chieftain, leading her own crew of raiders. The saga is explicit about her success, saying she harried far and wide. But the most famous part of her story is her quest to claim her dead father's magical sword, Tyrfing. The sword was buried with him and his brothers in a haunted burial mound. Her crew, terrified of the ghosts and eerie fire that surrounded the mounds, refused to go with her. Hervor went alone. She stood before her father's tomb and called out, demanding her inheritance. Her father's ghost responded from within the earth, warning her that the sword was cursed and would destroy her family. He told her, "Turn back, maiden! You have a Valkyrie's heart, but little sense." Hervor refused to be deterred, cursing him and his brothers until they gave her the sword. Finally, worn down by her sheer force of will, her father's ghost relented, and the cursed sword was thrown out to her from the flaming mound. Hervor's story is a blueprint for the Shieldmaiden. She is an exceptional individual who succeeds in a man's world through prowess and courage. Interestingly, after her adventures, Hervor does eventually settle down, marries and has children, becoming a more traditional high-status woman. This might suggest that for some, the Shieldmaiden role was seen as a temporary phase of life for a young, unmarried woman. So we have these powerful literary stories, but for centuries, that's all they were. Until historians started looking at accounts from outside Scandinavia. Perhaps the single most compelling piece of written evidence comes from the Byzantine Empire. In the year 971, the Byzantine emperor fought a brutal war against the Rus, a Viking-led confederation from modern-day Kiev. After the final battle at the fortress of Dorostalon, the Byzantine historian John Skylitzers described the scene. He wrote that, as the victors were stripping the corpses of the defeated Rus warriors, they found women lying among the fallen, equipped in men's armor who had fought against the Romans together with the men. This is an immensely important detail. It's a near-contemporary account from an external observer who had no reason to invent female warriors. He describes a specific discovery made on the battlefield. It is powerful non-Norse confirmation that women, armed and armored, did indeed fight and die alongside Viking men. Even the Vikings' own laws hint at this reality. Law codes from Iceland and Norway contain specific prohibitions against women carrying weapons, cutting their hair short like a man, or wearing men's clothes. Now, a key principle of legal history is that laws aren't typically written to forbid things that no one is doing. The very existence of these laws strongly implies that women taking on masculine attributes, including carrying weapons, was happening often enough to be considered a social problem that needed to be legally addressed. These sources gave the Shieldmaiden a historical shadow, but for over a century she left no physical trace in the ground. Archaeology had a simple, rigid rule for Viking graves. Weapons meant a man, and jewelry meant a woman. This was a circular argument. How do we know weapons are for men? Because they're in graves with male skeletons. How do we know a skeleton is male? Because it's buried with weapons. This bias was built in. Then, in 2017, a team of Swedish researchers dropped the bombshell. The story begins in the 1870s at Birka, a major Viking trading town in Sweden. An archaeologist named Hjalmar Stolpe excavated a burial chamber grave BJ 581. It was immediately recognized as the grave of an elite, high-status warrior. The grave goods were breathtaking. The individual was buried in a seated position with a complete arsenal: a sword, an axe, a fighting knife, 2 spears, and 25 armor-piercing arrows. They were buried with 2 horses, a mare and a stallion, marking them as part of the mounted warrior elite. But the most significant item was found on the individual's lap. It was a full set of gaming pieces for a strategy board game called Hennifatafel, or King's Table. This game is a simulation of military tactics, and its presence in a grave is widely seen as the mark of a military commander, a strategist. For 140 years, the person in this grave was presented as the ultimate male Viking commander. There was just one nagging problem: the bones. As early as the 1970s, an osteologist noted that the skeleton's jaw and pelvic bone looked more female than male, but her observations were dismissed. The weapons were so male that the paradigm held firm. Then came the 2017 study. Researchers led by Charlotte Hedenstierna Johnson decided to end the debate using modern science. First, they re-examined the bones, which strongly pointed towards a female. But the decisive step was ancient DNA analysis. They extracted DNA from a tooth and an arm bone. The results were unambiguous. The DNA showed 2 X chromosomes and a complete absence of a Y chromosome. Genetically, the individual in grave BJ581 was unequivocally female. The ultimate Viking commander was a woman. The study's authors didn't mince words, calling her the first confirmed female high-ranking Viking warrior. The backlash was immediate. Some critics argued the bones must have been mixed up, or that the weapons were just symbolic, perhaps belonging to her dead husband. But the study's proponents, like noted scholar Neil Price, pointed out a massive double standard. For 140 years, nobody questioned that the grave goods meant the person was a warrior. As soon as the skeleton was identified as female, people suddenly claimed the weapons must be symbolic. The simplest explanation is the most likely. The person buried with the complete equipment of a military commander was, in fact, a military commander. This discovery has changed everything. It has forced archaeologists to re-examine other graves, and they are finding more. Over 20 other female graves containing weapons have now been identified across Scandinavia. Most of these contain a single weapon, like an axe, not the full kit of the Birka commander. So what does all of this mean? The evidence points to a new consensus: the spectrum theory. There wasn't a single Shieldmaiden role, but a whole spectrum of female involvement in warfare. At one end, you have the Husfreyja, the mistress of the house, buried with the axe she used to defend her home and family. Somewhere in the middle, you might have women who occasionally participated in raids, like those found at Dor Astalon. Further along are the rare, professional warriors, women who lived a life of combat. And at the absolute peak of the spectrum stands the Birka warrior, a high commander, a strategist, and a leader of men. So the Shieldmaiden of pop culture, fighting in every Viking raid, is indeed a fiction. But the old idea that she was purely a myth is now demonstrably false. Women could and did take on the role of a warrior. The literary sagas gave us the blueprint. The historical chronicles gave us the eyewitness accounts. And finally, archaeology gave us the body. The Shieldmaiden was not a myth. She was a reality. Rare, exceptional, and formidable, but a reality nonetheless. So what are your thoughts on this? Let us know down in the comments below. If you found this interesting or learned something new, please give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe to 10-Minute History for more deep dives. Thanks for listening.